Welcome to the Rock Ag Podcast. This is your host, Garrett Coffey, Ag and Natural Resource Agent for the University of Kentucky in Rockcastle County. Today, we'll be joined by Martha Yount, Nutrition Education Specialist for the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Family and Consumer Sciences Nutrition Education Program. In this episode, we'll take a break from our normal podcast layout of production ag and start talking about some outdoor cooking. We will cover topics such as food safety, equipment and cooking temperatures, and cleanup in this episode. Thanks for joining us today, Martha. We appreciate you coming on to talk to us about some outdoor cast iron cooking today. We're going to cover some topics and go through some stuff. And one of my favorite things to do is cook and cast iron outside. I love it, and I know that we share that interest. And you actually taught me a lot whenever I first started getting interested in it. So I appreciate that. I've had a lot of fun with it. And so hopefully through this podcast, we'll be able to reach a few people and maybe get some more people started and give some pointers and stuff like that to get going. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Garrett. You know, this is one of my favorite things to do. I love outdoor cooking of all kinds, and cast iron is just really fun to work with. It's been around a long, long time. It's certainly nothing new, but we find new people every day that are getting started with it. So thanks again for letting me have this conversation with you.
Sure, absolutely. So I want to get started, and obviously, if we're wanting to get started into cast iron cooking, outdoor cooking kind of thing, tell us some equipment suggestions that if we're going to start tomorrow, what do we need to go out and buy today to start this process?
Well, there's a lot of right answers to that question. And if you have looked at cast iron in the stores, you see that, you're making an investment there. So it is good to sort of proceed slowly and build over time. Don't be in a hurry to buy every gadget that's out there. And in fact, if you already have something at home, even if you have a cast iron skillet, you can get started with outdoor cooking just that way. And I know most people many people will think about a cast iron camp Dutch oven when they're thinking of outdoor cooking. But if you have an indoor or a kitchen Dutch oven, I don't know what you want to call it, but the one that people would typically use inside their house in the oven, you could use that with outdoor cooking as well. It might not be as perfect as one that was built just for outdoor cooking. But if I was going to recommend to someone the first purchase that they make, a 12-inch camp Dutch oven is just a very, very basic piece of equipment. And it's an easy one to get started with. And the reason that I recommend the 12-inch instead of the other sizes is that a 12-inch Dutch oven has the same cooking volume inside it as a 9x13 pan. And that's just a very common size of kitchen pan. And so you don't really have to guess on the amounts to go in that 12-inch Dutch oven. If it fits inside a 9x13 pan, it's the right amount for that 12-inch cast iron Dutch oven. And you think, well, 12 inches is awful big. Maybe there's only 2 or 3 of us and I don't need one that large. But a 12-inch one's very versatile, and you can actually put a smaller pan inside the Dutch oven if you want to bake a smaller quantity. So for me, I think that that's my recommendation for a very first piece of equipment if you're going to purchase. And yes, that is a significant purchase. We don't advocate any one brand over another. The things that you want to look for are a well-fitting lid. A camp Dutch oven has 3 little legs on the bottom, and it has a rim around the lid to hold the ashes and coals on top so they won't get into your food. But really, if you find one that has a nice fitting lid, seems to be well made, we don't advocate a particular brand. I will say that the Lodge Cast Iron Manufacturing Company is right next door in Tennessee, and we do encourage people to shop local when they can.
That's right. I love their Dutch ovens. They work so well. And, I've used some of the older ones too. And man, if you can find one of the older Wagners or Griswolds or something like that, you found a real treasure on those as well.
And cast iron will last for generations and generations. Yeah. So this isn't something that's going to be a temporary piece. So be thoughtful when you purchase And if you can get a hand-me-down from someone, that's even better.
That's right. That's right. We, as we talk about using the Dutch oven, there's a couple of things that I think about, and I would like your opinion on is that, when we're using coals and stuff like that on these Dutch ovens, they get really hot. So, what about using something like a lid lifter and maybe a heavy set of gloves? And would you recommend having that kind of stuff with us as well?
Certainly, because if you get burned on that hot piece of metal, you're not going to be in a hurry to try cooking again. So, some basic things. And there are purpose built items like you can find some specialty tools, lid lifters to lift that hot lid off. Um, you can also use the backside of a claw hammer. So even though the purpose built item might be ideal for it, you don't necessarily have to have that, but you do want to make sure that you're keeping your hands and everything else safe from that hot metal. So something to lift the lid safely, whether that it is a cast iron lid lifter or if it is the backside of that claw hammer. And then some heavy gloves are a great thing too. You can purchase gloves that are intended specifically for cast iron cooking, or you can go to a discount hardware store and find some inexpensive welding gloves, which also work just as well and may cost a little less.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Very good. So let's move on a little bit and let's talk about when we're talking about going somewhere and doing some outdoor cooking and doing some things outside. It's not like cooking at home. We don't have a refrigerator sitting right there beside of us. We don't have all of our typical heat sources, and so it might vary a little bit. So talk to us a little bit about the food safety aspect of it, keeping the cold things cold and making sure that we get to correct cooking temperatures and stuff. Tell us about that.
Well, Garrett, thank you for asking me that question because it's another one of my favorite topics. My family calls me the food safety police, but we do want to make sure that the foods that we eat outdoors are just as safe and nutritious for us as the ones that we eat indoors. And no, we don't have that nice big refrigerator freezer most of the time with us, but we can do a couple of things to make sure that our food stays safe. Depending on how you're traveling, if you're in a vehicle and then you're cooking outdoors, you might be able to bring a full size cooler. Make sure that your food is packed in there with lots of ice, and that will keep it a safe temperature. Now, you're a little more adventurous than I am, and sometimes I know you're traveling on four-legged transportation.
Right.
And so you might want to carry that full size cooler with you. But you can still make sure that the perishable foods you take with you stay cold. You can use an insulated cooler bag or a smaller cooler that you might be able to pack in saddlebags. Or you can actually just choose to cook foods that are non perishable and you don't have to worry about keeping something cold. Some things that will help out with that, especially let's talk about meats just for a minute. If you're taking raw meat with you, you can freeze that at home before you leave and start out with it frozen. That means it's going to stay at a safe temperature for longer. And in that insulated cooler bag, the frozen meat with a few more ice packs in there will stay cold and stay safe for long enough. You The more perishable foods I always consider as first night meals. So if you're going to take that nice big steak with you, even if you start out from home with it frozen and it's in that cooler bag, you still might plan that as a first night meal, or maybe a first morning meal if you're having steak and eggs in the cast iron skillet over a fire for breakfast. Never take a chance with food that has been at the wrong temperature for too long. So we have sort of a 1 hour window in the summertime. In the wintertime, we have a little bit longer because the outdoor temperature is a little colder, but we want to keep our foods uh, at a safe temperature and avoid having them at room temperature. If we're outdoors, it's not room temperature, um, but certainly for under an hour for those foods to be out at room temperature, ambient temperature.
Yeah.
And then one other item of equipment I think would be perfect to add to your kit is a food thermometer, a meat thermometer, an instant read one that you can put in because it's hard to tell just by looking if food, particularly meats, are cooked to the right internal temperature. And we don't want to take a risk at getting sick because that would just ruin your whole trip. And sometimes with outdoor cooking, especially it's with a camping trip, you might be cooking after it's gotten dark and you really can't see very well. And so a thermometer is the way to go. And so you can ask Garrett will be glad to give you these numbers later, or anyone with cooperative extension. But with beef, lamb, and pork, we want to make sure that the center of that cut, and this is a whole cut like a chop or a roast or a steak, that the center, the very middle of that, reaches 145 degrees. That way we know that if there are any things in there that might make us sick, that temperature's gotten high enough to take care of that. If we're cooking ground meats like hamburgers or ground turkey, since those meats have been all chopped up and combined, we have to get them to a higher temperature to make sure that they're safe, and that's 160 degrees. And then chicken and turkey need to be cooked to an internal 165 degrees. And of course, fish, if you're fishing, that's the one just needs to be 145 degrees as well. So use that thermometer and make sure you're getting your meats to the right temperature. It can also help you not overcook. And I know that's my problem.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really want to be sure that meat's done. And so I
Right.
tend to overcook it, dry it out. So that thermometer is a great tool.
I think especially with cooking and cast iron over a fire or something like that, a lot of times it's hard to tell because we're not used to that temperature and we're not getting exact temperatures like we do with the stove. So either you burn the outside and the inside's raw, or you're cooking at a lower temperature, so it kind of cooks it all the way through and it doesn't really look done on the outside. So I think that that's very important when we're cooking outside like that, to make sure that we're getting in that right temperature control. Which kind of leads us into my next topic that I have for us is talk about, whenever we bake in a Dutch oven, if we're baking a cake or a cornbread or something like that, talk about some temperature control and how we can make sure that we're keeping the correct temperature on our Dutch oven.
Right. And baking has its own challenges there, because if you're cooking in an open skillet, Garrett, we can see what's going on. But in that Dutch oven where we're wanting to bake, we get heat coming from the top and the bottom. And whether we're using charcoal briquettes that came out of a bag or we're using campfire coals, we adjust the baking temperature by either adding or removing the coals. And using charcoal briquettes that come out of a bag, that's easier for a beginner. I think it takes a little more finesse with the wood coals. I'm still working on perfecting that. You may have that already under
So
control.
that's pretty tough. Those wood coals are pretty tough. They really are.
But it's a fun challenge,
It
and it's
is.
something that the more you do it, the better you'll get. So just for a starting point, let's say we were going to bake a cake in our cast iron Dutch oven. And if we're using that 12-inch one, which is my favorite beginner size, then just for a starting point, I would start out with 8 coals in a circle under the bottom and 17 on the top to get us about to a 350-degree oven. Now you can find charts that have suggestions on starting with coals, but remember, it is just suggestions, because if it's a really windy day, it's going to take a few more. If you're stewing or frying under your cast iron Dutch oven, you can put the coals in any arrangement, but if you're baking, you want to be sure and put them in a circle on the bottom, because if you put that coal in the middle, even though you think, oh, yeah, I just need one more, I'm going to put it right here in the middle, the way the heat radiates in there, it will burn every time.
Yeah.
So if you're baking, be sure and put the bottom coals in a circle underneath that and leave that middle empty. It'll get plenty of heat. And then the coals on the top of the lid, they'll be in a more even pattern all the way over the lid. And just because of the nature of heat, we put fewer coals on the bottom because all of that heat's going right up into the pan. But we have to put more coals on the top because we're losing that part of that heat as it's going up into the air. So that's why you put fewer coals on the bottom and more coals on the top.
One thing that I would like to touch on with this as well, that I learned the hard way, is that you want to preheat a Dutch oven just like you preheat your oven at home, correct?
That is true. There are some foods that it's not critical, but you'll get a more even uh,
Mhm.
bake with it. And especially if you're cooking cornbread, oh my, that really needs to be preheated
Right.
so that our pan is nice and hot. And you don't always have to preheat your cast iron camp oven to your full baking temperature, but you want to get the pan warmed up so that it's ready to cook right away.
Okay. So let's move on to talking about using a open skillet over a fire. Tell us how to
Uh,
use that.
Okay, well, direct heat, in some ways, that's easier than the baking. Baking might take a little practice, but if you're cooking in direct heat right over the fire, you put your pan closer if you want it hotter, and you move it farther away if you want it cooler. If you're using a grate over the fire, you may just have kicked a few rocks up there to prop your skillet or your pan on. It's good to have your actual fire built to the side, and then you can pull coals and burning embers over under your pan, and you've got more control than if you just built your fire right in the middle and put your pan right over it, because that is really really hot heat. So if you build your fire a little to the side or set your pan up a little to the side, that gives you more control. And you can use a small shovel. You can use a handy stick
Mm.
and use that to move the coals and the burning pieces under your pan if you want a higher heat, and further away if you want more.
Do we have to worry about our cast iron where we use it over a fire like that?
Well, now cast iron is so durable, and that's one of the things that make it perfect for outdoor cooking, because generally we're not having to worry about the pan melting. Now, I do know that some people are a little concerned about the soot that might get on the outside of their pan. So I have my outdoor cooking pans, and I really don't worry about the outside of them. Make sure the insides are nice and clean. But the soot on the outside, that's another reason those gloves are good. You'll keep the soot on the gloves and not on your hands. Cast iron can withstand really high temperatures. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't. If you tried hard enough, yes, you could damage a piece of cast iron, but it is really durable and can handle high heats. Now, the food in it can't really handle high heats all the
Right.
time. So you can certainly scorch and burn your food if you get too much heat under there. But don't be afraid to try using cast iron over a fire, because it is so durable, and you may burn a few things and have to scrub on that pan to get the burned part out, but the pan itself is going to handle that really well.
Very good. It's very durable. I really enjoy it. It's you mentioned going out on the four-legged transportation, and I mean there's nothing like eating out of a cast iron skillet and a cast iron Dutch oven when you're out on the trail somewhere staying overnight. So it's very nice, and it's a lot of fun to do for sure. Um, so whenever we've got our meal cooked and we are done, and let's talk about cleanup. And I'm going to break this down into a few different categories here. The first thing is going back to kind of the food safety side of it. What about storing leftovers? What about taking stuff with us, especially like maybe a Ziploc bag or aluminum foil to store that in, and how to store those?
Right. So if you have leftover foods that are considered perishable, now your leftover biscuits and cornbread, they'll be fine. You don't have to worry about keeping those cold. Would like to wrap them up so that you're keeping them away from pests and other things that would like to eat your biscuits
Mhm.
and cornbread. But if you have a leftover stew or other leftover main dishes, those are perishable. And so if you want to save your leftovers, then plan ahead and make sure you have room in that cooler bag and you still have ice packs, and take the food out of your cast iron. Cast iron is not good storage. It
Mhm.
is excellent for cooking, but it is not good for storing. So we want to transfer the food out of that and plan ahead for that. Even though most of the time people have great appetites when they're on the trail, you still may have some leftovers. You don't want to waste those. But if you can't save them safely, so if you don't have a way to keep them cold, uh, then it might be better to just make the sacrifice on that last little bit and not try to save it, or eat it if you can.
Yeah.
So take something with you, either the zip top bags, like you said, or some reusable plastic storage containers, and then put those leftovers in your cooler bag if you're wanting to save those overnight. And again, if you've had it out too long or you're worried about it at all, it's safest to, when in doubt, throw it out.
Hmm.
Even though we don't want to waste food, especially something that's as tasty as cooked over cast iron. But you don't want to take risks with that because there's no way to ruin a camping trip or a hiking trip with an upset stomach, and we don't want to do that.
That's for sure.
Um, oh, I did want to add one more comment, Garrett, when you're talking about the four-legged transportation. My son-in-law goes backpacking with he and his group of friends, but they will take a cast iron skillet. They draw straws to see who has to carry it because it's heavy. And
That's right.
their first night meal is steak and baked potatoes, and they freeze the meat and wrap it really well and put it in an insulated bag in their pack. And but I would hate to be the one that had to carry that skillet.
Yeah, yeah. I'll carry mine on a horse. I think that's right.
So after we've gotten the leftovers out, we need to take care of that pan.
Yeah.
Even though cast iron is really durable, we want to take care of it right away so that we can avoid rust. So after you've gotten your food out and scrape out as much as you can, then if it's something sticky, you can pour some water in your pan and put it back over the fire and let that warm up and soften any food residue. We never soak cast iron
Hmm.
because that leads to rust. But you can put a little bit of water in it, put it back over the fire, get it hot, and use your wooden. I use a wooden. It's like a wooden spatula. That's my
Hmm.
favorite cooking utensil, and scrape off any leftover bits of food. Then empty that out and dry it right away, or put it back over the fire and let the heat dry it. And always finish up with just a real thin coating of oil. Now, if you've baked cornbread in there, you might not need to do anything at all other than wipe out the crumbs.
Hmm.
And that's all you need to do. But if you've made a blackberry cobbler in
Ah,
your pan, it takes a little more work. And in that instance, a lot of times I may line it with aluminum foil just to cut down on my cleanup. Now,
yeah,
your pie will taste fabulous without the aluminum foil or with it.
yeah.
But if you don't want to spend a lot of time scrubbing out on the trail, especially, then you can line that with aluminum foil. If you're cooking something that's sticky or something that has a strong odor that you don't want to linger in your pan.
One of the greatest things that I have that really helps me is I have a small, it's probably about 3 inches wide and maybe 6 inches long piece of chainmail. I think is what they call that. And I mean it packs so easy. And it is, I mean, you can get anything off a cast iron with that. So a little bit of water, a little warm water, and rub that thing around. And man, I mean, you can really get cast iron clean. I love using that for my cast iron cleanup.
I've seen that. I may have to put that on my wish list for birthdays or other gifts. That would be a good addition.
Yeah, they are.
So can we talk about washing dishes outside?
Let's wash dishes. Let's get it all cleaned up so we can sit around the fire and take it easy.
That's right. Well, I like to cut out as much dishwashing as possible, but especially if we want to use reusable things, we want to make sure they're clean. And I know friends that I have that go backpacking, they may never wash their pan, and I just don't think that's not really how I want to manage things. And you don't have to have a lot of water,
Yeah.
but if you want to know the health department approved way for washing dishes outdoors, and this is great to do is if you're with a group, because especially in the health the in the situation of the world right now, and we're a little more aware of transmitting germs from one person to another, we wouldn't want to share germs on our dishes if we're with a group. If you're just with your own family, then I'm sure you can skimp just a little bit on some of these. But the way the health department would approve cooking outdoors is to use 3 containers. So that's your same 3 compartment sink. I have 3 dish pans that I keep in my camper. We have a little pop-up camper
Mhm.
in that kind of camping. I have 3 dish pans, and I use warm soapy water. Just heat that soap up over the campfire. Warm soapy water in one, and rinse water in another. And then if it's not just my family, then that third one has some sanitizer in it. And it can be as something as simple as a tablespoon of bleach, laundry bleach, just plain bleach put in there, or there are some tablets that restaurants and cafeterias use, and those are very portable. So that would go in your portable thing. So if you're the only one using your dishes, sure, you can skimp as much as you're comfortable with on the dishwashing. But if you're with friends or with a group, we really don't want to share any germs that might make each other sick.
Mhm.
And then those dishes can just air dry. So you wash in the soapy water, you rinse in the clear water, and then sanitize in that third one and let them air dry. And washing dishes outside is way more fun than washing them inside.
Everything's better outdoors, right?
It is. That is true.
Very good, very good. Well, what else would you? What other words of advice do you have for us about getting outside and cooking? Anything else that we need to be prepared for?
Well, I think that people need to think about making themselves comfortable outdoors. Now that's not the glamping kind of thing with the down feather bed and all of that. I just mean it's okay to do things that make you comfortable
Yeah,
outside. So if it's important to you to have a comfortable chair, then bring a comfortable chair. I can sit on the ground pretty good, but I need to find a good tree to lean back against.
yeah,
Don't be afraid to try cooking outdoors. Start simple, and just the more you practice, the better you'll get. Um, Allow yourself enough time to learn new things, and don't try to do it all at once. I think that that's a good one.
that
Um,
is very good.
just start slow, and the more you cook outdoors, the better you will get at it.
Yeah, I had, I've had some bad mistakes a time or two, some raw inside and burnt outside cornbread, and I burned a couple of hamburgers in a skillet a time or two. But after you kind of get used to it and kind of get used to your temperatures and how it works, it comes around pretty quick. It really does.
It does. And what you said about the sitting around a campfire and relaxing after you've had that tasty meal, it's a wonderful way to spend time with your friends and family.
It is. I think one thing that I thought of whenever I was doing that is that that's really something that you can take the whole family, take the kids, get them involved with how to cook in the cast iron and outside over the fires, and I think that's a really good thing to do for sure.
And let's not forget about trash. We don't want to leave trash when we
Yeah,
are out. If you pack it in, pack it out. It we don't really want to burn our trash out in
yeah,
the and I don't know if you want to get into leave no trace any, Garrett, with
yeah.
this, but
Always,
the best thing is if you carry it in, carry it back out, and make sure it
absolutely,
gets disposed of properly.
for sure, for sure. One thing that I always like to do on my podcast is talk about our extension resources and the resources that we have on everything that we've talked about today, from food safety to how to clean the cast iron. I know that you've got a publication and a video, and there's tons and tons of resources and tons of recipes that I might add, from our wild game all the way to our plated up and our everything else that you all do on your side of it. And so if there's anything that you need about cooking or food safety or any of that kind of stuff, we have tons of resources for that kind of stuff.
That is true. And don't feel like that you need a recipe that's specifically for outdoor cooking. You
Right.
can convert any recipe. And like Garrett said, we have so many recipes. Check with your county extension office.
Yeah.
With We have agents there in family and consumer sciences, agriculture and natural resources, 4-H youth development, and all of those, horticulture, fine arts. Let me get everybody in.
Yeah.
And all of those can get you to your resources.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us today, Martha. I think we've got some great information how to get people started and how to do it once they get there.
Garrett, well, you enjoy your next camping trip. I've got one coming up in a few weeks, and I can't wait.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sounds great. Thanks for coming on today. Thanks for listening to the Rock Egg Podcast. If you would like any more information on the content of this podcast, please contact Garrett Coffey at the Rockcastle County Extension Office. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share our podcast.